that can actually pull 6 doses out of these vials. That is an increase of almost 20% in terms of overnight. However, there's not enough of these latter type of syringes being made. It's conceivable the Defense Production Act will be used to get more of those type of syringes out. We should also talk about these immigration laws. He has the ability to reinstitute DACA and I believe DAPA, which is the extension of the DACA protections from the children who were brought here illegally to also their wider family members.
Yes.
He will also send a legislation to the House and then presumably to the Senate. Do you want to go through some of those, Emma?
Well, I mean, basically what this immigration proposal would do in broad strokes is they say modernize the immigration process, but in short, it would allow for a path to citizenship, which I think would take 8 years. 8 years. Also make it easier for asylum seekers along the border. And really what it does is 11 million undocumented immigrants. Biden's proposal gives them a path to citizenship. It's longer than I would propose. 8 years is, I think, way too long. There's an indentured servitude quality to it, but it is obviously an improvement if we're looking at the gutter of immigration reform and policy, which is the Trump administration.
So they would have a temporary status for 5 years, and then they would get a green card after 5 years. And then within 3 years after that green card use, they would be able to apply for citizenship. And that also, obviously, the DACA stuff you can do by executive action, but they would make that statutory. They would, and it's unclear to me, but there's 3 prongs to this. Like you said, the border management, you talked about that. It would supposedly, broadly speaking, move the refugee and asylum programs back to a more humane and orderly process. There would be a hope to reinstate the program granting minors from Central America temporary legal residence in the United States. That program was ended by the Trump administration in 2017. It would set up a reunification program for Central American relatives of U.S. citizens and would allow those who have already been approved for U.S. residency to be admitted in the country rather than waiting at home for an opening. We have plenty of room in this country. And on top of which, it's unclear to me what specifically they're talking about, but they are recognizing, at least in their rhetoric at this point, that one of these prongs in dealing with citizenship needs to address the causes of migration, which are economic and safety in a lot of these countries. We've talked in the past at Honduras.
Does that connect to our drug policy? That seems fairly broad, but is there any? I didn't see
no indication yet of what that's going to be.
Right.
But we do know that Honduras, one of the murder capitals of the world. There is you've got still a lot of paramilitaries there and a lot of drug, like you say, drug cartels. And we know, and I would imagine Joe Biden knows, one would hope, after decades of a war on drugs, that it's been an abject failure in every single possible measure you could, whatever metric you use for the drug on the failure of the drug, the war on drugs, it has failed.
Drug use, drug addiction, still static or has gone up, and funding just continues to go up. And then just lastly about Biden's immigration, the way he adjusts the federal government's relationship with ICE. I mean, he theoretically has the power to break the contracts with ICE. that the Trump administration expanded, but he's not going to do that. Obviously, he's come out feverishly against abolish ICE, even though that's my position. But does he change their funding? Does he allow for immigration and customs, or ICE basically, to have less power and less kind of immunity when it comes to the brutalization of immigrants? Is he going to change that relationship? I think he will do so marginally, but we'll have to see.
Well, I mean, if we're going to put all 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country on a path to citizenship, one would expect that ICE's role, at least internally in the country, would be greatly diminished, and should be. There's no reason for it at that point. And so hopefully we will, there will be a certain amount of sort of questioning of how are we dispersing our resources when we don't need an ICE? You want to put people at the border? I mean, I would prefer if you would demilitarize the border, frankly. But certainly internally in the country, you don't need, if you're going to allow. Now, this applies to immigrants who have been here since January 1 of 2021. Part of that is they want to discourage people from coming, but I think, frankly, we're going to have to deal with that process in a better fashion. We shall see. We were talking about the COVID response, and this is going to be the big issue, I think.
The defining feature of his,
without a doubt,
of his presidency, potentially.
Without a doubt. The big, I guess, dilemma that we have now, he is trying to get 1 million doses of vaccine administered per day. Apparently, as of last week, it's reported by David Dane at the American Prospect, they're pretty close to the 1 million a day you need if you want to hit 100 million in 100 days. 900,000 daily doses is the 7-day rolling average, according to David Dane over at the Prospect. So to get to 1 million per day doesn't seem like that huge of a task. The problem is that there are new variants of COVID-19, including the B117 from Great Britain, that are, while not any more lethal, far more contagious. And so you're going to need more than 100 million doses in that first 100 million days if you want to control this pandemic. And
just so people are clear, it doesn't seem like the vaccine, its efficacy is affected by the variants. It just increases the contagiousness, and thus, obviously, we're going to see ramping up death. I mean, it could, but that's not what we're seeing right now.
Right. I mean, the bottom line is there's just not enough evidence out there yet to make any definitive statements on what the implications of these more contagious variants are. I mean, nobody's quite clear on, are they more contagious because you can get them by touching things? Is it they're more contagious because they travel through, non-N95 masks more efficiently? Is it that you can get a bigger viral load quicker? Do they replicate quicker within the human body? None of these things are clear yet. There's just simply not enough data and evidence. The scientists are studying it.
It does seem to affect the efficacy of the antibody drugs, though.
Is that right?
Yeah, from what I've read.
We will see. I mean, a lot of this stuff, again, is we haven't gotten there yet. But the big key is going to be to ramp up the production of what they call these high dead space syringes as opposed to the low dead space syringes, so that you can get an extra 20% out of these bottles of Pfizer vials of vaccine that need to go out. And that's going to be the big challenge, or at least one of them, by the Biden administration, and 3 days ago, they confirmed what a lot of us suspected they would do. They're going to use the Defense Production Act. How they're going to do that yet, we don't know. It's going to be a function of where they see the greatest need. We were talking about Donald Trump rolling back the lifting of the virus travel ban. Biden folks are adamant that they're going to prevent that from happening. The other last-minute attempt that Donald Trump had was, we spoke about this in the past couple of weeks, a Schedule F directive. It was essentially a directive to to undo the civil service protection for tens of thousands of federal workers, ostensibly to get in more political partisan people into these positions. And what it really is ultimately a part of was the Trump agenda from early in the Trump administration. Steve Bannon, when he was part of the administration officially, I suspect he's still quite in contact with Donald Trump.
Much like Roger Stone, just creeping behind the scenes, making things happen, and destroying whatever's left of our democracy.
I'm sure you remember when Steve Bannon went to the CPAC, which is the conservative, the big conservative confab they have every year, and said,
"Oh, I go every year, right? Have a great time." No.
I would be surprised if you haven't covered it in the past.
I actually have not. That's almost too awful for me to consider. Going there.
It's like
I would rather go to a Trump rally.
It's like Comic-Con for the worst people on the planet. Yeah. And so at CPAC, Steve Bannon announced that their number one agenda was the destruction of the administrative state. And when you remove the civil service protections from our government workers, you make these positions become highly politicized, highly partisan. You lose the expertise. You lose their protection to do the right thing based upon science or good, sound public policy, because they are either afraid of political retribution or they are in and themselves highly politicized. And so this is one of those things where apparently the order, the paperwork needed to reclassify these affected employees will not reach the president's office until after tomorrow. And this is a prime example of how, I think people who work in big companies know that there's certain things you can slow walk. And this is probably one of those. The Biden administration and President Biden is not expected to sign those things.
Well, it's almost like, these civil servants, they got this paperwork. They had to, do all these things. Oh, it's going to take a lot longer. They don't want these Trump appointees being burrowed into their agencies and gumming up the works. It was just, look, you got to love it, right?
Yep. All right. Let's play this clip. We meant to play this earlier about the National Guard presence in Washington for tomorrow. Here is Tucker Carlson, who, incidentally, I should tell you, was reported by, I think it was Politico Playbook this morning, as having dinner with George W. Bush in Florida. They both own homes in a town in Florida, I guess.
I thought Tucker was anti-war and just rebranded himself as a paleo-conservative. That's what I'd heard.
He's going through a rebranding of the rebranding. He is the right-wing populist who, by my count now, has a house in Maine and a house in Florida. May also have one in New York, I imagine, unless he stays in an Airbnb there when he does his show. He's the one who said, don't take the masks and all that too seriously.
Right.
Of course, then had his own, was in Maine broadcasting for some strange reason.
Yeah. What kind of tie is he going to wear in this third iteration of himself? He had the bow tie. Now he's at the it's a bolo tie.
Bolo tie is next.
Right.
And we should also say
that's why he's meeting with Bush.
Reportedly, according to Politico, they were having dinner at a third party's house. So it's nice that all these folks are having dinner parties. I remember those. I imagine they're all wearing their masks indoors while they have this dinner party. But here is Tucker Carlson. Instead of suggesting that the the presence of National Guardsmen in Washington, D.C. is a function of the insurrection that was driven